Well, it's happening again. Virginia's lawmakers are considering whether or not they should spring prisoners after they serve just 15 years of their sentence. They're calling it a second look bill, and it keeps coming back each year. But Democrats and even some Republicans are taking it seriously to the point that they may actually try and pass this thing. For more on it, I want to bring in Nick Freitas. He's a delegate from Virginia's 30th District and joins us now. Nick, good to have you with us, sir. Delegate Freitas, excuse me.
No, Nick's fine. Thank you very much for having me on.
Of course. Give us a sense of the debate that's taking place right now in the Virginia legislature.
So I think the kindest version of the debate I can come up with is that there are certain people that believe that when someone has served 15 years that they might have had an opportunity to rehabilitate within prison. And so they want to be able to have a second opportunity to go through a legal process and looking at the circumstances of the crimes that was committed, the behavior within prison, in order to determine on whether or not they might be eligible for early release. That's the kindest version of this I can come up with. The problem is that as this bill was originally drafted, it included pretty much everything. So you can imagine someone who went away for murder and is supposed to serve, let's say at least 40 years in prison, and now at 15 years they might be able to get out. This is the sort of thing that carries some pretty serious implications, not just with respect to our criminal justice system, but how we treat victims.
So when when someone is sentenced, judges will often make stipulations about what their future looks like and their chances of getting parole, those sorts of things. And I've seen that when it comes to this legislation, it would allow, according to the Washington Times, it would allow even serial killers who are currently serving sentences of life without parole to be given an opportunity to get out after just 15 years in jail. If you get a sentence of life without parole, I always thought that the point was you're throwing away the key. You're taking a dangerous person out of society.
Yeah, well, it's supposed to be, and we don't have the death penalty in Virginia anymore, so life without parole is supposed to be kind of the worst penalty you can receive. And let me say something else about this, Vince, that I think people need to understand, because this is never properly appreciated. I want you to imagine a child, I want you to imagine that someone that went away for a long time because they raped a child, okay? And now they're getting a second look. So what does that mean? What does that mean for that, let's say that 12-year-old that now 15 years later down their life, they've moved, they're married, they have kids, and they think this guy is going to jail for their full sentence. No way they're getting out. No way a society would be so obtuse that they would let this person out early. But now, in order to make sure that this guy serves his full time, she's got to stop what she's doing, get on a plane, fly back to Virginia, relive that experience again, in order to try to convince people that this person should just serve the time that he was originally given. Like, that's horrific.
This is one of the rationales that the people who support the bill are advancing. They're like, don't worry, victims would be involved. Wait a second. So as you just point out, that means that victims would be called to relive the awful experience they've already gone through, and to have to debate whether or not this guy should be released into the public again or not. An example of this, I want to share some audio, because the other night, as I mentioned a moment ago, there was a hearing on this subject, and Virginians who have been victimized by the very people who are now in the state prisons were given an opportunity, a very small window of opportunity to say something, but they were only allowed to do it over the internet, not in person. The whole thing is crazy. But here's one Virginia mother of a 9-year-old sexual abuse survivor. Take a listen to her testimony.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Lauren Medall. I am a mother of a 9-year-old sexual abuse survivor. Her father was found guilty on a number of charges in March of 2022, including forcible sodomy, which under Virginia Code holds a mandatory minimum sentence of life in prison. My daughter has undergone therapy since November of 2022 and is still in therapy for PTSD through CHKD's child abuse program. We have done so much work to move forward and lead the most normal life that we absolutely can after experiencing something so harrowing and disturbing. And I just want to say that I do not support this bill as it jeopardizes the safety of so many victims affected by violent offenders and their heinous and unforgivable crimes.
What's maddening about this, Delegate Freitas, is that that's so common sense. I'm horrified even listening to her have to relive all of that. And yet the legislature, led with these Democrats leading the way, planning on letting somebody like that out.
No, it's like you said, it's not just absurd, it's obscene. And thank God Delegate Amanda Batten was actually sitting on that subcommittee, because she pointed out that there was a bunch of proponents for this bill that were permitted to speak online, but we actually had victims and their families that had driven all the way, waited for hours to speak in person, that were cut short and not given adequate time to actually share their stories. And so we see who's getting the benefit of the doubt with respect to not only this policy, but the way it was actually presented in committee.
Yes.
And it's clear to me, at least on some level, that it seems like the fix is in on this.
I want to share some of that audio. This is Virginia Delegate Amanda Batten confronting the committee for not allowing in-person testimony this week.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to thank you for allowing each of the people who signed up online to speak for a minute. And I would ask that you extend the same courtesy to the people who traveled here to this room to speak to us in person today. So everyone who did not have a chance to speak for 1 minute, like the folks online did, please allow them to speak as well.
I appreciate the comment that was made. Unfortunately, I know that there were other speakers who 1 minute just wouldn't capture it, and I understand what you are deeply concerned about, and thank you for that comment.
Madam Chair, I'd just like to point out that it disenfranchises the people who actually spent time to drive to Richmond today to wait for hours to be in this room and were not allowed to speak, where the people who were online were allowed to speak.
That audio is outrageous. One reason is because the chairwoman, I'm not sure who that is, but she sounds so disconnected and aloof and not that interested. And the other part that really annoys me is that, you would think your state legislature would prioritize allowing people who show up in person to be able to address the public, given it's a public comment period, but people weren't allowed to do that?
Oh, Vince, that is the process. Like, I've been a subcommittee chair, and the rule that I always had was that if you showed up in person, we gave you priority with respect to the time we had available for testimony. And then we went online. We tried to get to everybody. And if it was a very serious situation, I used to chair the gun sub. We had a lot of very, very, serious, heart-wrenching testimony, and I always thought it was my duty and responsibility to make sure that it was heard. And here we have this situation where this is, again, egregious. And I'm very grateful that Delegate Amanda Batten brought that up. She also pointed out something else that was very necessary for this committee to hear, and that was there's a lot of victims that will never be able to be involved in the process because they were killed. They can't show up. And yet, the person that perpetrated the crime against them, they will have an opportunity to speak for themselves under the second look, but their victims never will.
What is I thought when I first heard about this bill, I was like, oh, this must be like a Democrat thing. But it's not just Democrats. There are some Republicans. I see Delegate Carrie Coyner is a Republican from Chesterfield. And she told the Richmond Times-Dispatch that she's all on board with this. She said, quote, "I'm a believer that people can be redeemed and rehabilitated. And I'm a believer we should do everything we can to have people as free and independent of our government as possible." I'm sorry, these people are in jail for heinous crimes. Their ability to get out of prison is either conditioned on their good behavior already or whatever, or it's precluded by the disgraceful nature of their crimes, and that's why Virginia decided to lock them up in the first place.
Well, I think as we look at criminal justice reform, which there's a couple terms that get thrown around very loosely these days. One is criminal justice reform, and the other is restorative justice. And I will tell you this much. I have carried criminal justice reform bills. For instance, I carried a bill which says it was a civil asset forfeiture reform bill. I don't think the government should be able to take your property without actually first convicting you of something.
Right.
But when we're talking about something like this, where you have people that have committed absolutely heinous crimes, they've victimized another human being, and now we're just going to arbitrarily give them a second look at 15 years, I don't think that's right. I think there's something fundamentally flawed in a system that essentially tells victims, yeah, sorry, I know we've already established you're a victim. We already established that this person was the perpetrator and they've been locked up for it. And we told you that they would go away for a certain period of time, both for the purpose of protecting the public and also for the purpose of just punishment. Punishment is a part of this process, and it's supposed to be. And now we're saying, maybe not. Maybe in 15 years, we'll have a whole new group of people look at this that are not there in the moment when you had all the people available to testify, when you had all the people that were absolutely affected by this coming in and providing that testimony. Maybe they'll get that. Maybe victims will be involved. What if they choose not to? What if a victim says, look, I am sorry, I've moved on with my life and I cannot relive this again? And now that testimony can't be heard.
Delegate Freitas, how does what I'm curious about is how an issue like this even gets put in front of the House of Delegates at this moment of all moments. It's like the last thing that's on anyone's mind right now is how do we release more criminals into the public? You know, we're living through a time where we've seen violent crime on the rise. We see out of control carjackings, for instance, in America's cities, homicides, shootings. It's crazy, actually. It's getting more and more insane, and we need more order, not more disorder. How could you advance a piece of legislation like this?
There are some people that are very genuine in their desire to believe in rehabilitation, and I understand that. I want people to be rehabilitated.
Sure.
By the same token, we have another group of people, and this is a very prominent theory within the Democratic Party right now, is that essentially everything is broken down into oppressor and oppressed, and it's all power structure imbalances. And so the presupposition of a lot of people going into this is not that if you're in jail, you're guilty. It's that if you were in jail, it's because society failed you, or because you were put there under false pretenses because the police can't be trusted, or because the education system failed you.
Right.
Essentially, it's everybody else's fault except for the person that actually committed the crime.
Yes.
And so if you have that sort of world where everybody can be equally or easily divided into oppressor or oppressed, well, all of a sudden the people in jail, they're not the people that committed violent crimes against innocent victims. No, they're oppressed in some way, and they're going to come to their rescue, and they're going to rehabilitate them. And really, it's society that needs to be blamed for what happened. And I absolutely believe that's a mindset which fuels a lot of the theory on this.
It's also very destructive. It's cultural Marxism, what you just described, and it's infecting everything. Hey, Delegate Nick Freitas, thank you very much for an update on that. I appreciate it. We'll stay in touch with you on this issue and so much more. Thank you, sir.